Hey there, and welcome to the First Class Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Freiburger, a former airline captain with over 10,000 flight hours, and I believe that everyone can be a leader. On this show, I talk about a simple concept called take the lead. See, leadership is influence, and take the lead is the choice to build that influence. Your intentions are invisible, but how people experience you never is, which means you can have good intentions and still land wrong with others. Take the lead is how you close that gap. We use aviation as a lens, but you don't need wings to practice it. All right, let's get into it. So you're sitting in the cockpit of, let's say, an Airbus 320, and you're the pilot, and there's an engine fire. But the kicker is that you've never been actually trained on the engine fire drill. What would you do? Would you press a bunch of buttons? Would you probably feel a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of stress? Probably hope that things work out? But we all know how that's going to end. Leadership's the same way. And nobody's going to point at you when you're sitting in that situation and say, you know, there's something wrong with you as a person. No, they're just going to say you have not been trained on how to do an engine fire drill. So leadership is the same way. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You just haven't been trained on how to lead. And that was a huge part of my life. So welcome to another episode of the First Class Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Freiburger. And this episode specifically is just going to be a heart-to-heart about what it means to be a leader, and specifically why I started First Class Leaders. And prepare for it. This will be a vulnerable dialect of my personal experiences and challenges, and the stress that I went through when I was trying to figure this stuff out on my own. And then what really made the biggest difference in my life, in my career, my personal life. And then we'll get into a little bit of the Take the Lead framework and where that came from. So yeah, this is just a one-on-one. So me and you. And if you have any comments, you have any questions when you're listening to this episode, please just write it in the comments or reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to answer them as much as or as best as I can. So, I often tell the story, and I go back to when I was young. I mean, I had the picture perfect career. I think I was in an airplane for my first time when I was 9, if I can remember correctly. My dad had an ultralight. He had bought an ultralight, and I went for my first flight, and I'll never forget that feeling. And every pilot out there that's listening to this, you know what I'm talking about. There's a reason we got into aviation, and it wasn't because it was work. It was because there was some sort of passion or joy or fulfillment or fun that went with the job. We love what we do, but it doesn't come without its challenges. I was the poster boy. Like I said, I had the perfect career. I soloed on my 14th birthday. I was super young. I was able to fly an airplane by myself before I even could drive a car. I got my first recreational license when I was 16, my private when I was 17. I graduated in the top of my class, yada, 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 only to fail my first interview. So as you can imagine, when I failed my first airline interview, I was really dumbfounded. Up until that point, technically, I was a great pilot. Now, sure, I actually had failed my commercial flight test the first time, but I went on to succeed with it. You know, I had a couple of setbacks, but overall, I graduated in the top of my class. And so on paper, I had it all. Like every person, every test verified and validated that I was a great pilot. And so you can imagine how confused I was when I actually went into my first airline interview and I didn't get it. It was so weird. I went in so confidently. I was so sure I'd get it. I even had a reference that I had flown with, a person that I had flown with that was part of the company that referred me. And I thought that was going to help me get a shoe in as well. So I went on to spend about $1,000 on some interview training, and basically they told me what to say in the next interview. And about a few months later, I actually the airlines Air Canada called me, and I went for my interview at Air Canada, and I told them basically I had I talked about exactly the answers, or gave the answers exactly like I had practiced, and lo and behold, I got the job. So here I am, 24 years old, and I'm an Air Canada pilot. Probably, I believe I was the youngest at the time. It's irrelevant, but my moral of the story is I started going through my airline, my experience at the airlines, and I'll never forget my very first line flight when I was released after training. And the captain I was flying with just started talking about how much he had to work and how stressful his life was. And he started talking about not being faithful to his wife. and he started talking about stuff that he was going to do on the layover that wasn't appropriate. And I was sitting there and I'm like, what did I get myself into? And I'll never forget the feeling I had of how scared and how fearful I was that I made the wrong decision. So here I am, 24 years old, at this the best job in the world, the best career in the world, and it's the first time I felt like, oh boy, I made a mistake. Now I fast forward to the next flight, and there's a point to all of this. I flew with another captain, completely opposite. Loved my job, right? Greatest job in the world. Loved doing it. Been doing it for 20 years, and it's very positive. And I felt great. I felt positive. I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. And so now I had these polar opposites, these two different people. And depending on which captain I flew with, my emotions, my emotional, I would say, well, let's just call them my emotions, were very much dictated by which captain I flew with. And over the course of my career, I'd flown with both these types of captains over and over and over again in different varying degrees and different levels. And so my emotions of stress and anxiety would come up when I'd fly with that captain who was complaining. I'd fly with that captain who was micromanaging or was direct and blunt. And, and I would spend a lot of my time just blaming them, thinking, hey, like if this guy was just a little bit like happier, geez, like this job would be a lot more fun. And then when I'm flying with the great captains, I'm like, yeah, why can't everybody be like these captains? And I fast forward through my career, I got to about 28 years old, and this emotional roller coaster ride had been going on for my whole time at the airline so far. And I was also in a relationship that had just not been satisfying, not been fulfilling. A great person. I was with a great person. She made money. She was a doctor. She had a great head on her. She was smart. Yet we weren't happy. And so again, I looked at that situation like, if she just listened or if she just did this, then I'd be happy. Like this shouldn't be so frustrating. This shouldn't be so hard. This shouldn't be so difficult. And I asked myself one very, very, very life-changing question. So I asked myself, what if there's something I'm missing? What if there's a better way? And when I asked myself that question, I didn't recognize what I had done, but I had interrupted a pattern. This pattern of blaming and justifying my situation, my environment, my circumstances, who I flew with, or who I was in a relationship with. I actually, at that point, stopped blaming. I interrupted this pattern of blaming, and we're going to come back to this. And I started looking for solutions. And the first thing I come up with is, well, maybe this is what therapists are for. Because the second question I'd asked myself is, well, how do I figure out what I don't know? Because I don't know if there's a better way. So how would I figure out if there's a better way? And so I signed up for therapy, 28 years old. I had no idea. That was my rational thought at the time. I'm like, well, maybe this is what therapy is. And lo and behold, that's exactly what it was. And so I started going to therapy. And, along with therapy, I started reading a lot of books around emotions and leadership and ego. And I just picked every book I could think of on self-development, on emotional intelligence, on communication and conflict. And I read them all. And in alignment with that, I was going to therapy. And over the years, and this is probably about 5 years long, let's say, of doing this, not by myself. I guess at this point I had a therapist to help me as well. Eventually I hired a coach, and I've had a couple of coaches in my past as well. But the thing that came out of it was recognizing that the greatest thing I'd ever done in my entire life, that changed my entire life, was I interrupted that pattern of blame and justifying that I told you about before. And this is where everything changed, because what I'm going to talk about next is a super simple concept that, if used, will completely change the way you look at life. And not just life, the way that you deal with difficult captains in the cockpit, the way that you deal with stress and pressure of a relationship or conflict or the cockpit. It doesn't matter if you're a pilot. It doesn't matter if you're, in another profession or not in a profession at all. If you're listening to this, this concept will help you be a better human, be a happier human, a human who is more in alignment with who they actually want to be. And so what this framework does is it helps pilots or people close the gap between what we intend and what actually happens, what the actual impact is of our words or how we're showing up. So I'll give you an example. When I was, let's say, flying with a captain who was maybe coming across as micromanaging or snippy or short or, very negative, I had a choice. And I actually didn't recognize I had a choice, but I actually did have a choice. And this is kind of hindsight's 2020, but we actually have a choice in those moments. And the choice that we have in those moments is to blame and justify or take the lead. Take the lead. Okay, it's like having an angel and a devil on your shoulder. So the devil is saying, just blame and justify, because it seems so justified. It seems so easy to be like, well, if they weren't so negative, then I wouldn't feel so stressed. This wouldn't be so difficult. And I get it, because if they were happier, because when I'm with a happier, more positive, more optimistic, less micromanaging, more inclusive captain, I felt happier. So it felt super justified. It felt super rational. And once I recognized that what I was actually doing, what I was actually choosing to do unconsciously, and trust me, this is nobody's fault. Remember what we talked about at the start? If you haven't been trained on how to do an engine fire, right? Nobody's going to say that there's something wrong with you as a human. They're just going to say you haven't been trained. So it's the same here. There's nothing wrong with you if your emotions are dictated by your circumstances, your environment. But I'm here to tell you, you actually have a choice to let those emotions or let those environments, those situations dictate our emotions, or to take the lead. Okay? When I was flying with a difficult captain, okay, I had this choice, and I didn't choose it. But we're going to go through this framework and talk about how to choose it. But I just want you to sit with the idea that you do have a choice as to how you show up and how you feel when you're in those difficult environments. Okay, it's really, really, really difficult to get to that point where you're not feeling any tension, and that's what this isn't about. I'm not here to say magically you're not going to have a stressful response to something. What I'm here to say is that when you recognize that you have a stressful response to something, you do have a choice. The challenge becomes recognizing that we have a choice. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. The first thing being is that we all have this thing up in our brains called the amygdala. And I'm not even going to say the science behind it because I'm not even completely sure of all the nomenclature. But the point is we have this reptilian part of our brain that goes back, whatever, thousands, tens of thousands of years. Again, don't quote me on any of that part. But I do know for a fact we have a part in our brain that is wired for survival. And you may have heard this before in some way, shape, or form. I'm just going to go through it because this is exactly what happens. So when we perceive something as a threat, so if a captain or a person in my life is complaining or they're negative or they're coming across as rude, and I perceive that as a threat, right? And so in order to perceive something as a threat, I have to believe that it's a threat to me in some way, shape, or form. And so what would happen is because I felt stressed or because I felt this tension when somebody, let's say this captain, was negative or blaming, because I felt this tension or this stress, I believed it led me to believe that was caused because of that person. Okay, so this external thing caused my internal state. I used to believe that. I used to believe that when somebody was rude or mean or micromanaging or something, and it caused maybe me to feel shame or embarrassment or tension or stress, I used to believe that those things were actually causing my internal state. Okay, bear with me for a minute. So when we perceive something as a threat, our brains are incredibly powerful. And they care about one thing, surviving. So what our brains will naturally do, and this is every human and nobody is ever immune to this. Okay, you can get better at recognizing and catching this, but our brains, when we perceive a threat, go into survival. So imagine you're out in the African lion or the African safari, and there's a lion running at you. What are you going to do? Right? You're not even going to think about what to do. You're going to turn and you're going to run and you're going to do whatever you can. If you have to jump off a 20-foot cliff and break your leg and still keep running, you'll do it. You'll keep going because death is the other option. So you perceive something as a threat, and what happens is your cortisol spikes, which is the hormone inside your body or the chemical inside your body that happens or get released when you stress. And the whole point of them is that it puts you in the fight or flight mode. It gives you your heightened senses. It gets your smell, your eyes, your ears to open up. You get your heart rate up, and that's so that you can escape that danger. That's actually what's going on when we stress. We're trying to escape danger, and it's so important to understand this for a couple of reasons. First, when we understand where stress is coming from, then we can understand that it's our perception. It's what we believe is a threat. Okay, so if we are looking at something and we believe it's a threat, we will stress. If we look at something and we don't believe it's a threat, we won't stress. I'll give you another example. Lion's running at you, you believe you're going to die, you stress, right? Now, imagine that lion was running at you, but it's in a cage. And there's no chance that it's going to get out of that cage, and you believe that, right? No longer are you going to stress. You might feel it a little bit depending on how close the lion is or how thick the bars are in the actual cage. But let's say for argument's sake that the cage is super thick and you have no reason of a doubt that that lion is not getting out of that cage, okay? So because you believe that, you are not going to stress. So the reason we're talking about beliefs now is because your beliefs are the most powerful thing that drive everything to do with your behavior. So if you're stressing, most people will try to figure out how to avoid stressing, how to suppress it, how to get rid of it. But the actual root of stress stems from what you believe. So behaviors follow beliefs. And we're not going to get too deep into that, but just understand again that everything is dictated by what you believe. So you believe the lion's going to kill you, you are going to stress. If you believe that captain is causing your emotional state because they're being super negative, you are going to feel tension, you are going to stress. When we get into that headspace, when we get into that stress, or this, I like to call it the autopilot loop, because it happens very unconsciously. So somebody is rude, or somebody is negative, or somebody comes across as, mean, and I feel this stress or this tension, and then I take that as a signal that that person is a threat. I go into blame and justification mode. And blame and justification mode are horrible. They are literally causing you to stay stuck. They are literally causing the demise that you are trying to avoid. They're causing all of your problems, all of them. Blame and justification keep you stuck, because what it looks like is, captain is being micromanaging. I feel stress. I feel like I feel threatened, right? I'm going to blame and justify. I'm going to blame the captain, because if they weren't so rude, then I wouldn't feel this way. I'm going to justify it. Well, I'm feeling this way because they're so rude. Okay? And then what happens is you don't even look for an answer. You just chalk that up to being the answer. Well, if, next time I'm going to bid to avoid this person. Right? So the next time you go fly with a captain who's great and you feel great, so you use that, and that validates that person, like you're flying with a great person, you feel happy. So now all of a sudden that happiness is a signal that that person you're flying with is great, and everything's great, right? The challenge becomes you are at the mercy of your environment. You are at the mercy now, your emotional state, your stress, your anxiety, your frustration. It is all at the mercy of your external environment. And so you're going to go on a roller coaster ride through life. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to go on a roller coaster ride and my emotions be dictated by my external environment. It's a really, 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 really difficult way to live. Yet most of the population lives that way. So I'm here to tell you there is a choice not to live that way. And take the lead is that choice. Take the lead is a powerful 3 words. It is a mantra. It is a pattern interrupter. Call it what you will. But take the lead is what interrupts that loop and stops it. And when you interrupt that loop, you now have a choice. You can choose to blame and justify, or you can choose to take the lead. When we choose to take the lead, what we're choosing is we're choosing to look for solutions. We're choosing to find answers. Okay? We're choosing to get curious or to take ownership of our emotional state instead of blaming somebody else for it. Because we're recognizing that my beliefs dictate my emotions. I'll give you a really, really simple example. If I believe, again, that lion is a threat, right, I'm going to blame and justify. So if I believe a captain is a threat, I'm going to blame and justify. But watch this. If I believe that that captain just needs some leadership, they just need some help, right, I'm going to start to look for solutions. I'm not going to feel stress and tension, not nearly as much. I'm going to start to think about, how do I help this person, right? Because they're actually just caught in that loop that we just interrupted, right? They're blaming, they're justifying, they're perceiving something as a threat. That's all that's happening. And when they get stuck in that loop, nobody's helping them break free. I'll give you another example. I talked to an operator last week, and they called me desperate to find an answer to the amount of incidents that they have been having. And I'll give you a little bit of, I want to make sure that this all stays confidential. So I'm going to change the story a little bit, but I'll give you the gist of what happened. Pilot, co-pilot, captain, first officer flying into an aircraft or into a busy airport. First officer's flying the airplane. They bust through the localizer. Captain takes control. He's assertive. He's dominant. When he takes control, he comes across as a threat to the first officer, for lack of a, now that we've understood this. So he comes across like he's upset, comes across like he's, mad. So first officer shuts down. Okay, captain takes control, lands the aircraft fine, taxi off the runway. And at this point, they're both in the loop, right? Captain's fairly new. He's thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get a Cadores. I'm going to get in trouble. He's stuck in this loop. And he perceives these things as a threat. He's blaming and justifying. He's like, well, if the first officer didn't do this, didn't do that. I'm making this up in the sense of, I don't know what he was thinking, but he was stuck in that loop. It's very obvious for several reasons, which we're going to talk about. So both pilots stuck in this loop, okay? They're both sitting there with some sort of threat. They're perceiving something as a threat. And what happens next is the scary part. And this is what operators are banging their head off a wall, trying to understand, why is this happening? So the first officer goes heads down, starts doing the checklist, puts up the ground frequency. Captain starts taxiing. They're not supposed to taxi unless both their heads are up. Captain makes the wrong turn. Captain crosses an active runway without a clearance. First officer recognizes they crossed the runway, and they cross it again. They also recognize that they're not on the ground frequency, and you can understand what happens after that once they finally get on with the apron frequency. And the operation calls me because there were several examples of these things happening. And they've spent millions of dollars on the technology. They've spent millions of dollars on the more training, additional training for their pilots. They've actually doubled their SOPs in the last 5 years, something like that. He mentioned as well. And they're banging their head off the wall. Like, what are we supposed to do? Like, why is this happening? And I asked them one simple question. I said, when you debrief those pilots, did they know what they did wrong? He's like, yeah, absolutely. I said, okay, so it's not an SOP problem. It's not a knowledge problem. He's like, well, yeah, but then why would they do that? I said, because they were stuck in the loop. And so that's when I showed him. I said, like, we have this loop. We have this power in our brain that tries to protect us, just like when it was trying to protect us from running, from getting killed by a lion back in the day. It's trying to protect us. And if we're not aware of it and we don't interrupt it, I don't care what the SOP says. I don't care what I've learned. I don't care how many accidents I've watched. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If we don't know, or if we don't recognize that that's what's happening and normalize it in our industry, these accidents are going to keep happening. These incidents are going to keep happening. Because in these moments, those pilots had no idea what was actually going on. And your ability to make a decision when you are stuck in the threat loop, right? Think about sometime when you were under pressure, or maybe you got really frustrated, and then you said something and then 5 seconds later or a couple minutes later, when you cooled down, you're like, why would I say that? I should not have said that. That's not me. Or you're in a high pressure situation. Maybe you're in the middle of an interview and they ask you a question and you don't know the answer. So again, right, now you're perceiving that as a threat, because if I don't know the answer, right, they're not going to hire me. So what do? Your brain goes into survival mode. You start mumbling words. You start mumbling jumble that you might not even understand or believe, right? And then you're like, oh, why did I say that? Or you're in the sim and you're in your command upgrade, and they're throwing engine fires at you and failures at you, and something catches you off guard that you hadn't seen before. And you're like, oh man, what am I going to do? Like, I've never seen this before. And, oh my God, if I don't do this properly, I'm going to fail my command sim my whole career, right? And my upgrade and that pay raise and the status, and my wife's going to leave me because she doesn't think I'm a good enough pilot, right? Like, that's where our brains go if we don't know to interrupt it, when we perceive these things as a threat. So how do we interrupt it? And that's what this podcast is all about. That's what First Class Leaders is all about. We interrupt it by taking the lead. Now, take the lead is just, remember, it's the choice to interrupt it. The next conversation is, what do we do next? What do we do once we've interrupted? But before we get into all of that, and you're going to hear about it throughout this podcast, you're going to hear about it if you come join First Class Leaders, or if you just send me a message, I'll send you literally the training on our system. I don't hold it back. I don't charge for the system itself. It's all free. It takes 15 minutes to learn it. But what it does is it gives us a choice, and we can now choose to start thinking about solutions. Again, remember, when we don't have that choice, we're just operating. We're just doing things. We're not even aware of what we're doing. We're not even thinking about what we're doing. And that's not a good state to be in, not in the cockpit, because that's when we don't operate at the performance level that we know we can, the technical level that we know we can. And just again, remember, aviation, if we think about it in this sense, aviation is at least 75% human, right? We're humans in a technical environment. And our human interaction, and I'm not talking about, the hour spent flying level at autopilot on, like, that's all technical. I'm talking about the human aspects, right? Making decisions, the pressure and the stress and the, making the right call and putting the inputs into the autopilot, making the weather decisions and dealing with the person beside you really effectively, and navigating conflict and navigating personalities and tension moments and everything like that. It's at least 75% of the job, because once you figure out the technical they can train, right? There's a right and a wrong to the technical side of flying, okay? But it's very difficult to train leadership because there's no right and wrong all the time. It's very much an art form. Like, I can try one move, I always call them leadership moves. I can try a leadership move in one situation, it works really well. I can try it in the exact same, or another situation, exact same move, and it could work really poorly, right? So leadership is an art, and it's not something you're going to learn in your entire lifetime. It's not something you're going to perfect in your entire lifetime. It's something that you'll learn over your entire lifetime if you choose to believe what I'm saying. And you don't have to know the answers right now. The only choice you have to make right now is, should I explore this? Should I try and explore this, knowing that you probably have felt that pressure or stress that I'm talking about, that frustration that I'm talking about, right? That time that your intentions and your impact were completely opposite. You said something and somebody took it the wrong way, right? Those are all signals. Those are all signals for you to take the lead. And so if those are the signals, and you feel, if you felt any of them, like, oh, I'm not showing up the way I want to, right? If you've ever answered that question, or if you've ever said, oh, my intentions or my impact is landing different than my intentions, right? Or you're going into a difficult situation and you want to figure out how to lead it really well. Those are all signals to take the lead. The next step is learning the move. And there's millions of moves. So this isn't something you're going to learn in one podcast episode. It's not going to learn. You're going to be learning moves the moment. Again, first we have to make the choice to take the lead. And then once you choose to take the lead, now you're going to be asking yourselves questions to start finding the moves. And once you start asking that question, well, how do I take the lead? Boom. That is a powerful question. So think about what I want you to do right now for the rest of this episode here. We're gonna just kind of do a quick exercise. Look around the room and find something that's green. Okay, go green, green, green. Look around the room, wherever you are. If you're driving a car, green, 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 green. Look around the room, everything that's green, okay? Now close your eyes and tell me something that's blue, okay? And obviously you can't tell me, and hopefully if you're driving a car, you don't close your eyes, but it's really, really hard to remember something that was blue because you were focused, because we programmed our attention to look for something that was green. Okay? The reason that is so important to understand is because I've talked about this threat loop and how unconsciously we get into it and we blame and justify. And you probably have done this. Well, we all have done this, but you're probably recognizing this now that I've talked about it and I've surfaced it. Okay, so now that you're recognizing that, okay, that's what your brain's been focused on without you even understanding it. Just like the color green. And so you haven't even seen the color blue. You haven't seen the leadership moves. You haven't explored them yet. You haven't recognized them yet because you didn't even know to look for them. Right? When that person is blaming and justifying or talking down to you, okay, you went into survival mode. And again, nothing wrong with you. You just haven't been trained to lead that person. That's why leadership has nothing to do with title or rank. Leadership is a choice. Okay, it's a choice to take the lead. It is a choice to own how I show up, how you show up in any given challenge or situation. That's what leadership means. Okay, inspiration, impact, those are all byproducts of leadership. But leadership starts with the choice inside. And it's a choice to remain humble, right? Admit what you don't know. It's a choice to take ownership, right, for your emotions, take ownership for your role. Don't blame, don't justify. Zero blaming. Okay? Leadership is the opposite of blaming. Think about it. Right? There's no leader that blames other people. There's no leader that blames their situation. They don't do that. They're looking for solutions. So it's humility. I don't know what I don't know. Ask for help. That's leadership. It's the choice to take ownership for our emotions, right? For our actions, for our impact. It's the decision to be curious instead of judgmental. Judging something shuts down growth. Curiosity fosters growth. Think about it. You have to be curious. You have to be open to a new idea, a new perspective in order to grow. You can't just judge your way to grow. It doesn't work like that. And then we have support. So raising the standard together, thinking we're all just trying to raise the standard together. Think about two pilots. Okay, this is the other thing you can keep in mind when you have a dynamic in the cockpit that's maybe having some tension or some stress or some conflict. There's no pilot that is trying to be unsafe in a flight. Like, our lives are at stake. We don't worry about the 200 passengers behind us. My own life is at stake. So if I'm coming across as, or if a captain's coming across as rude or inconsiderate, anything like that, remind yourself they're just not aligning with who they actually probably want to be, right? I'm sure they want to be somebody who's safe. They just don't understand what's happening to them. They don't understand how they're stuck in this loop. So they need leadership. So support means I believe everybody just needs me to be the leader. Everybody just needs leadership. And again, you might not be able to lead that person right away, but learning the process of learning to lead that person, that's going to give you the best shot of helping and leading those moments, especially when you're under pressure. So we've got humility, curiosity, ownership, support, and the last one is courage. None of these principles are going to happen without courage. The courage to do and align with who you want to be, no matter the external cost. Because right now, as humans, we're typically chasing, and this is, I used to do this myself, I still do it sometimes, and I'm learning how to be more in alignment with who I want to be. When we stay in alignment with who we want to be, sometimes there is an external cost. Think about, like, I admit my mistake, I might get fired from my job, okay? But it's not a question of, should I admit my mistake? I don't want to get fired. It's, how do I admit my mistake, right, without getting fired? But again, how do I admit my mistake? I admit my mistake because that's who I am. Not even if it's at the risk of getting fired. Because then what happens is, if I get fired when I admit a mistake, the question becomes, well, maybe that wasn't the right environment for me. Because would you want to work for a company that doesn't It doesn't support pilots admitting mistakes. Okay? So as you walk away from this conversation, or listening to this podcast, I guess it's a one-sided conversation, I want you to do just one thing. And it's look around in your life, in your day-to-day. Look around, maybe for 5 minutes a day, every day. Just reflect on your day. And look at the moments where you lost influence. Look at the moments where you blamed. Look at the moments where you justified. Look at the moments where you just didn't feel like yourself, or you didn't show up the way you wanted to. Maybe it's in a conversation with a friend, or maybe it was just in a conversation with yourself, right? I didn't feel like going to the gym today. Anything, whatever. And then ask yourself this question: how can I take the lead? How can I take the lead? Okay? Don't worry about all the different guiding principles that I talked about, but just for now, focus on that. Can I take the lead? And watch what happens. Watch what happens. And then let me know. Right? Do you start to find answers? Do you start to look for solutions? Right? Your brain will start to automatically look for solutions, because now you've changed your focus from blaming yourself. So it's, I didn't go to the gym today. So old Kyle would be like, oh, you're lazy, right? You're going to be out of shape. Like, why can't you just go to the gym? Like, you're not good enough. Okay, that's old Kyle. New Kyle says, how do I take the lead? How do I take the lead in this moment? Right? Maybe that for me is, I take the lead by recognizing that, or getting curious as to why I get lazy sometimes. Or take the lead maybe is getting curious onto how us as human beings respond under pressure, or why it's hard to make decisions like that sometimes to go to the gym. Or maybe I learned a little bit more about rest and recovery. Maybe I've learned a little bit more about the fact that recovery is a huge aspect of working out. And those days I don't feel like going to the gym, sometimes that's actually a sign that my body's telling me I need to slow down, I need to rest. Right? So when I stop beating myself up and I stop blaming and justifying, and I'm taking the lead, I'm looking for solutions. I'm not looking for excuses. I'm looking for understanding. And in that pursuit to look for understanding, I've learned so much about working out and the balance between working out and why I feel lazy sometimes. And instead of beating myself up, I learned how to lead it. I've learned how to lead those moments. And that doesn't mean like beating myself up and forcing myself to the gym, right? I learned to lead those moments. And leadership, again, it's not a title. It's not a position. Leadership is that choice to look for solutions. So that's it for this week. If you found this useful, please send it to somebody else that might be struggling, somebody else that might be going through something, and introduce this concept, take the lead, right? Help people recognize that we're just humans that haven't been trained on this stuff. And that's step one. And that's step one to the rest of your life. That will change. I guarantee you, if you focus and learning, if you spend some time on practicing this and seeking to understand, take the lead, it will absolutely help you in ways that you wouldn't have dreamed possible. It is the solution to blame. It is the solution to the greatest threat in aviation, the greatest threat to your happiness, the greatest threat to your contentment, your fulfillment, which is blame and justification. Okay? Thank you again. And I love and appreciate everybody listening. I've always got my door open. And the only question now that I have for you is, are you ready to take the lead? That's it for this episode. If something in the conversation landed for you, consider taking the lead and sharing this episode with a friend. And please consider leaving us a review while you're at it. The more reviews we get, the more people we can reach and help take the lead. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.